I will take the name Mexican enemies have given me. The whites will learn it, and you will learn it.
Imagine becoming famous for playing a character whose name literally means stupid in another language. Imagine smiling for the cameras while knowing you're getting paid half of what your white co-star makes. Imagine a director getting so angry at you on set that other people have to physically hold him back from attacking you. This was the reality for Jay Silverhills, the first Native American actor to play a Native American character on television. He became a household name as Tonto in The Lone Ranger, but behind that friendly smile was a man carrying secrets that would break your heart. In 1957, when someone asked him about his most famous role, he gave an answer that shocked everyone. Just 3 words: Tonto is stupid. That wasn't even the worst of it. Today, we're diving deep into the real story of Jay Silverheels, the man who changed television history but paid a price that nobody should ever have to pay. Get ready, because what you're about to learn will change how you see everything. Let's go back to the very beginning. Jay Silverheels wasn't born with that name. He was born Harold J. Smith on May 26, 1912, on the Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve near a small town called Hagersville in Ontario, Canada. He came from a large Mohawk family, and I mean really large. He was one of at least 10 kids all crammed into a tiny house. Can you imagine sharing a home with that many brothers and sisters? His father's name was Alexander George Edwin Smith, and here's something incredible about him. He was a war hero. He fought in World War I and earned the Military Cross for being incredibly brave during a battle at a place called the Somme. That's one of the most famous and deadliest battles in history. But here's the heartbreaking part. When Alexander came home from the war, he wasn't the same man who left. The war had damaged him in ways that couldn't be fixed. The constant sound of artillery, those massive explosions, had left him deaf. He was stuck working on a farm and surviving on just $49 a month from the Canadian government. $49. His war medals didn't put food on the table. His injuries never went away. Harold watched his father suffer from terrible headaches and hearing loss every single day of his childhood. Harold's mother was named Mabel, and she was part Mohawk and part Seneca. She carried the enormous weight of keeping the entire household running. Back then, doctors often wouldn't even see Native American families, so Mabel used traditional medicine to take care of everyone. They couldn't afford much of anything, and what little they did have came from working the land, trading with neighbors, or using herbal knowledge passed down through generations. Poverty wasn't just something they dealt with occasionally. It wrapped around their lives from the very start and never let go. But even in all that hardship, young Harold showed signs of something special. By the time he was just 5 years old, he was already showing incredible athletic talent. He would race around playing lacrosse in local matches on the reserve, and he was fast, really, really fast. By the time Harold turned 19, he was playing professional box lacrosse for a team called the Toronto Tecumsehs, and he used the name Harry Smith. He didn't go alone on this journey. His cousins and brothers, who had nicknames like Porky, Beef, and Chubby, were right there with him. They traveled all over the place together, going through Buffalo, Rochester, Atlantic City, and beyond. They played lacrosse almost non-stop throughout the entire 1930s, earning money, escaping poverty as best they could, and building up a reputation. That's actually where the name Silverheels came from, and the story is pretty amazing. During one game, Harold sprinted past a defender so incredibly quickly that it looked like his shoes were flashing silver in the light. The name just stuck after that. Newspapers started calling him Silverheels. Fans would show up to games specifically just to see him run. One season, he scored more than 4 goals per game on average, which is absolutely insane. Coaches from other teams started assigning 2 men just to guard him because one person couldn't keep up. But even though Harold was becoming famous as an athlete, that didn't mean he was free from the horrible system that oppressed Native Americans. Harold grew up during a time when Canada's residential schools were actively trying to erase Indigenous languages and cultures. At Six Nations, students were beaten for speaking Mohawk. Some children were fed soap or physically strapped as punishment. Harold's own sister was sent away to one of these residential schools, and when she came back home, she couldn't even speak her own language properly anymore. Families were being torn apart by government policies that banned traditional ceremonies, punished their spirituality, and pushed Native people into silence and shame. Government officials called them lazy. They said Native Americans lacked the ability to compete in society. That message didn't just stay in official reports, it was everywhere, in how people looked at them, and how people talked about them, and how people treated them every single day. When the Great Depression hit America and Canada in the 1930s, Harold's family, like so many others, sank even deeper into poverty. They moved to Buffalo looking for any opportunity they could find. Harold worked all kinds of odd jobs, labored on farms, and did absolutely whatever it took to survive. His father, despite being a decorated war hero who had fought bravely for his country, could barely move with terrible pain. His mother had to barter away family heirlooms, precious items that had been passed down through generations, just to get food for her children. The government rations they received were often spoiled and rotten. Harold watched his parents give up everything they had just to keep the lights on and food on the table. That kind of grinding, desperate poverty doesn't just hurt your stomach. It makes people feel like they don't even exist, like they don't matter to anyone. But Harold pushed forward anyway. He refused to give up. His incredible speed on the lacrosse field started opening doors that had been closed before. In 1932, he went professional and started getting paid to play lacrosse, earning $75 per game. That was actually big money during the Depression when most people were starving. In one game up in Montreal, a rough foul sparked a massive brawl, and Harold threw punches that got him suspended from the league. But when he came back, you know what happened? Ticket sales tripled. People wanted to see him play, even if it meant controversy and fighting. He was making headlines, and he just kept going, kept pushing forward. Then, Harold decided to try boxing. He fought as a middleweight in the famous Golden Gloves tournament at Madison Square Garden in New York City. He made it all the way to the semifinals before taking a brutal punch that broke his jaw in 2 places. The injury ended his boxing dreams right there, but the prize money he earned kept him financially afloat. He lost nearly 25 pounds because he could only eat a liquid diet while his jaw healed. But even then, he didn't quit on life. That boxing experience taught him something incredibly valuable. It taught him how to take pain, absorb it, and keep moving forward no matter what. In 1937, Harold toured Los Angeles with his lacrosse team, and this is where everything changed. One day, while he was sprinting around at a place called Gilmore Stadium, a famous comedian named Joe E. Brown noticed him. Brown was impressed by Harold's athleticism and offered him a small role in a film. Harold performed a stunt, a diving catch that took 11 takes to get exactly right. For that work, he was paid $150. That was twice what lacrosse paid him. From that moment, things started to shift in a new direction. Harold got a Screen Actors Guild card, which is like a union membership that actors need. He started calling himself Jay Silverhills, changing his name to sound more Hollywood. And by the end of that year, he had appeared in 5 different films. He wasn't a star yet, not even close, but he was in the door. He had gotten his foot in. But Hollywood definitely didn't roll out any red carpet for Jay Silverhills. He worked as a stuntman, doing dangerous physical work and earning less than $20 a day. At night, he had to bus tables at restaurants just to survive and pay his rent. But in 1939, something bigger happened. He landed a real role in a movie called Drums Along the Mohawk. It paid $350 a week, which was more money than he had ever made in his entire life. The movie studios liked the name Silverheels. They told him to use it officially because they said it sounded exotic and interesting. He started taking on small roles, but they were almost always the same type. He was playing unnamed Indians over and over again. Casting directors would make him strip to the waist, taking off his shirt like he was some kind of product on display. They were judging his body more than his actual acting ability. It was humiliating and dehumanizing. But still, Jay showed up to every audition. He learned his lines. He kept getting work, even if that work was degrading. In 1941, he finally got a speaking role where he actually had dialogue. By that point, he had been in more than 15 films, and he was usually uncredited, meaning his name didn't even appear in the credits. He was playing characters like Indian Scout or Warrior Number 2. But Jay never gave up on improving himself. A friend told him, "If you can read Shakespeare, you can read anything." At first, Jay didn't think Shakespeare was for someone like him, but he studied it anyway. He learned it. He made himself better. Jay served in World War II, though the historical records about his service are pretty thin and unclear. In 1945, when he returned to Hollywood after the war, he officially changed his name to Jay Silverheels. But the film industry hadn't changed at all while he was gone. Native American actors were still being pushed aside so that white actors could wear dark makeup and play native roles instead. There were very few roles available for real native actors, and the ones that did exist were usually insulting stereotypes. In 1946, Jay auditioned for a movie called Captain from Castile. He was so poor that he actually starved himself so his only suit would fit properly for the audition. The director made him take off his shirt just like always. It was humiliating, but he got the part. The film ended up being a financial flop, but at least Jay had a job and a paycheck. Still, even when he had actual lines to speak, he often stayed uncredited in the film's official records. During this time, he traveled across the American South with his lacrosse team, and the racism he faced was loud, constant, and inescapable. Hotels turned him away because of his skin color. Restaurants wouldn't serve him food. He had to sleep on buses while his white teammates got comfortable rooms. Once, in Louisville, Kentucky, police officers actually threatened him just for using a bathroom that was marked whites only. These weren't rare, unusual events. This was constant. This was his life. And that's exactly why, later in his career, when he finally had a real platform in Hollywood, he used it to fight for better roles and better representation for Native American people. A whole decade passed before anyone in Hollywood really noticed Jay Silverheels as a serious actor. That changed in 1948 when a famous director named John Huston cast him in a movie called Key Largo, alongside huge stars like Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Jay played a character named Tom Osceola, a Seminole fugitive. Finally, he had a credited role in a major studio film from a big company. They shot the movie on the Warner Brothers backlot in Burbank, California for 78 days. They built Florida settings in a controlled environment to keep costs low. But for Jay, this movie meant something much more important. It meant climbing out of the shadows. He was no longer just another nameless face lost in the credits. 2 years later, in 1950, Jay was cast in a Western called Broken Arrow, a film that claimed to be progressive and fair to Native Americans, but still couldn't quite let go of old racist habits. Jay played Geronimo, which was a strong and powerful role, but he wasn't the lead character. That main role went to Jeff Chandler, a white actor from Brooklyn who wore dark makeup to portray a character named Cochi. Even in a film that supposedly tried to present Native Americans more fairly and respectfully, Hollywood still couldn't bring itself to let actual Native actors play the lead roles. Real Apache people were hired as background extras from the Fort Apache Reservation. Jay, who was Canadian Mohawk, gave his portrayal of Geronimo real dignity and power. But the contradiction of the whole situation wasn't lost on anyone paying attention.
Then came the moment that changed Jay's entire life and actually changed television history forever. In 1949, when The Lone Ranger came to ABC television, Jay Silverhills beat out 35 other actors to become Tonto. The show first aired on September 15, 1949. For the very first time in television history, a Native American actor was playing a Native American character. Think about how huge that was. For 2 decades before that, the radio version of Tonto had been voiced by white men like John Todd and Roland Parker. Even when TV producers first considered casting a real native actor for the TV version, they hesitated and second-guessed themselves. One native actor was actually fired from early rehearsals for refusing to speak in broken stereotypical English. The producers went back to having John Todd play the role before they finally decided to give Jay the job. At that time, Hollywood's standard practice was to paint Italian actors with something called Armenia Bowl red clay to make them look Native American enough. Jay's casting broke that terrible mold. He wasn't supposed to win that part according to Hollywood's racist standards, but he did win it, and it changed absolutely everything about representation on television. But there was always a huge problem with the character's name, and Jay knew it from day one. The word Tonto literally means fool or stupid in Spanish. Jay Silverhills absolutely knew this. He lived with that knowledge every single day. Publicly, on camera, and in interviews, he smiled and was professional. But privately, he deeply resented it. In 1957, during a visit back to his home reserve in Ontario, someone asked him about his famous role as Tonto. His answer was quick and sharp and honest. Tonto is stupid. That was all he said, just those 3 words. But behind those words was a full decade of quiet frustration, of swallowing his pride, of playing a character whose name was an insult. That name stuck through the decades, even as Native American groups and activists pointed out how offensive it was. When Johnny Depp played Tonto in 2013 in a big-budget movie, the controversy returned all over again. Nothing had really changed in all those years, and the problems went way beyond just the name itself. Jay had a reputation on set for never reading his lines exactly as written, not because he was lazy or unprofessional, but because the lines were often terrible. They were stiff, broken English written by white writers who thought that's what sounded authentic. So Jay would improvise and make up his own lines on the spot. He'd say things like, "Me wait here, you go into town, that right." Those simple phrases became famous and stuck in people's minds, but the directors were absolutely furious with him for changing the script. Alan Dinehart, who worked on the show, remembered how one director named Wilhelm Tile went completely red with rage. Other crew members had to physically hold Tile back from attacking Jay on set in 1955. But Clayton Moore, the actor who played the Lone Ranger himself, defended his co-star. "Let it play," Moore would tell the directors. "It sounds more natural this way." Jay had a valid point. He actually knew how real people spoke, but Hollywood didn't want reality. They wanted a stereotype, and Jay was forced to deliver it over and over again. Behind the scenes of The Lone Ranger, things weren't much better than what happened on camera. The budget for each episode was only $12,500, so corners were cut everywhere. Jay and Clayton Moore didn't even have proper dressing rooms in the beginning. They literally had to change clothes in a gas station restroom down the road from the filming location. Can you imagine? 2 stars of a hit TV show getting dressed in a gas station bathroom? The heat on location was absolutely brutal, especially when they filmed in Chatsworth, California. The suede and wool costumes they had to wear turned into ovens under the hot sun. Jay finally had enough one day. He just refused to get dressed. He stood there, waiting. Clayton Moore warned him that delaying the shoot could cost crew members their jobs because of the tight schedule. But Jay wouldn't budge. He held his ground. And you know what happened? The very next day, private dressing rooms magically appeared on set. It was a small victory, but it meant something important. It showed that Jay Silverhills wouldn't just accept being treated like he didn't matter. Jay could have just accepted the fame and stayed quiet about everything else. He was a star now, after all. The Lone Ranger was one of the top shows on television. It ranked number 7 in the Nielsen ratings for the 1950 to 51 season and stayed in the top 30 shows for years after that. Over 8 seasons, they made 221 episodes. But Jay never forgot what that success had cost him personally. He didn't like what Tonto had become in the public imagination. He didn't like being the sidekick who always spoke in broken sentences and said "kimo-sabe" all the time. He was fluent in English. He was articulate and sharp and intelligent. but the show refused to let him be those things on screen. Then something scary happened that stopped the show cold. In 1955, during a fight scene rehearsal, a stuntman accidentally fell onto Jay. Clayton Moore noticed that something was wrong. Jay was walking strangely. Moore followed him to his trailer and found Jay clutching his chest in pain. He was having a heart attack. Despite being a professional athlete, a lacrosse champion, and a Golden Gloves boxer who had been in incredible shape his whole life, Jay was also a heavy smoker. That caught up with him. He missed 8 full weeks of filming while recovering. During that time, the writers introduced a new character named Dan Reed to fill the gap that Tonto left. The writers explained Tonto's absence by saying he was in Washington, D.C., meeting the Great White Father, which was a phrase used for the president. That one line said more about how Hollywood viewed Native Americans than the writers probably realized.
At home, away from the cameras and the fame, Jay was just Harold Smith. He had married a woman named Mary DeMora in 1945, and they had 4 children together: Jay Jr., Marilyn, Pamela, and Karen. From his first marriage to a woman named Bobby Smith, he had 2 more children, Steve and Gail. Jay would joke about his family's mixed heritage. On The Tonight Show one time, he said he married an Italian woman to get back at Christopher Columbus for discovering America. He called their kids Indelians, a mix of Indian and Italian. The joke was funny on the surface, but it hid something much deeper. Jay's grandfather had been a Mohawk chief. He grew up on the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario. Hollywood's version of what an Indian was supposed to be was a million miles away from the truth Jay carried with him every single day of his life. In 1953, Jay took on the role of Satanta, a Kiowa chief, in a film called War Arrow. It wasn't a lead role, but it put him on screen alongside big Hollywood names like Maureen O'Hara and Jeff Chandler. Filming stretched from early March through April, and they shot across Arizona in places like Nogales and at Sonoita's Empire Ranch, plus a few scenes in California's Bagora area. What started out as a solid action western ended up being trimmed down by the director, George Sherman. He took out several exciting action sequences and replaced them with talkie scenes that explained the action instead of showing it. Even the studio admitted later that this decision made the film weaker. Still, the movie had strong stunt scenes and was shot in beautiful Technicolor. Maureen O'Hara would later say that Chandler was nice to work with, but didn't impress her much as an actor. Silverheels' character stood on the opposite side of the central conflict, which was a reminder of how native roles were usually positioned in Hollywood films. Just outside the main focus, but still present enough to fill a stereotype. The following year, in 1954, Jay played another supporting role in Drums Across the River. This time, he played a character named Taos in a western directed by Nathan Duran and starring Audie Murphy, who was a real-life World War II hero. The movie was shot in Technicolor in some of California's most scenic spots, including Barton Flats and Red Rock Canyon. Murphy played a young man trying to stop a war with the Ute tribe while being falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit. Jay's role wasn't just background decoration. His character represented the native voice in a story about land disputes and rising tensions. The film had intense horseback riding scenes, fights, and what one critic called a leap of death stunt that really stood out. These kinds of physical scenes came naturally to Jay, who had once been a professional lacrosse player and boxer. The production cost around $1 million, which was considered a big budget at the time. After the Lone Ranger TV series wrapped up filming in 1956 and stopped airing new episodes by 1957, Jay returned as Tonto one more time in 2 theatrical movies released in cinemas. First came The Lone Ranger in 1956, and then The Lone Ranger and the Lost City of Gold in 1958. The second film was 81 minutes long and shot in Eastman color by United Artists. He acted alongside Clayton Moore once again. The film did fine financially. It wasn't a massive hit, but it wasn't a flop either. But what really hit Jay hard was what came after these movies. The role of Tonto had made him famous all over America and even around the world, but it also boxed him into a tiny corner. From that point forward, almost everything he got offered were similar Native American roles, and they were often thin, one-dimensional, and stereotyped. It was the kind of typecasting that slowly dried up his career options. In the 1960s, he kept showing up in westerns and TV guest spots on shows like Wagon Train, Wanted, Dead or Alive, Rawhide, Laramie, Daniel Boone, and The Virginian. But almost always he was playing the same kind of character over and over. Even when Jay delivered solid professional performances, he rarely got the recognition or variety of roles that he truly deserved. He appeared on Daniel Boone 3 different times between 1964 and 1965, playing roles that barely gave him any meaningful dialogue at all. Here's something that will probably make you angry. While filming The Lone Ranger, Jay earned about $100,000 per season. If you adjust that for inflation, that would be around $850,000 in today's money. That sounds like a lot, right? But here's the crushing part. That was still only half of what Clayton Moore was making. Half! For doing the same amount of work, for being just as important to the show's success, Jay was paid exactly half. That pay gap followed him through most of his entire career. He was never paid equally for equal work. As the 1960s moved forward, the Native American rights movement started gaining steam, and with it came criticism, but not from Hollywood executives or white people. The criticism came from within Native communities themselves. Activists started calling out how characters like Tonto reinforced old harmful stereotypes. One scholar called Tonto an Indian Steppenfetchit, comparing him to a racist black stereotype from old movies. Russell Means, who was a leader of the American Indian movement, actually used Tonto as an insult in the same way that Uncle Tom was used as an insult in black communities. Jay Silverheels found himself caught between 2 impossible positions. On one side was the fame he had earned and the doors he had opened. On the other was the image that fame was built on, an image that many Native people found deeply offensive. He started to disappear from television screens, not because he wanted to retire, but because networks and studios got nervous about potential backlash from activists. Even his past success couldn't protect him from this changing cultural climate.
He could barely talk anymore. On July 17, 1979, just months before his death, Jay received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It's one of those brass stars embedded in the sidewalk that tourists take pictures of. He attended the ceremony in a wheelchair, surrounded by Native American dancers performing in his honor. He could barely mumble a few words of thanks. It was a quiet, bittersweet moment for a man who had spoken so loudly through his actions throughout his entire life. On March 5, 1980, Jay Silverhills died at the age of 67 from complications of that stroke combined with pneumonia at a hospital in Calabasas, California. He was cremated, and his ashes were returned to the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario, where he had been born almost 68 years earlier. His son, Jay Silverhills Jr., picked up the family torch and pursued acting just like his father. He appeared in The Legend of the Lone Ranger in 1981, though that film was plagued by so many production problems that it became a cautionary tale in Hollywood. The lead actor's entire voice had to be dubbed over. The original Lone Ranger actor, Clayton Moore, was legally blocked from wearing the character's mask in public, which caused a huge media controversy. The film flopped so badly at the box office that its star never acted again. But Jay Jr. continued working in television, trying his best to walk the same difficult line his father had walked, being proud of his heritage, being visible, and pushing for better roles for Native actors. Back in 1966, when Jay officially launched the Indian Actors Workshop, he said its main purpose was to tap into the dormant creativity of the Indians. That creativity didn't stay dormant for very long. In the years after Jay's death, the workshop's influence could be felt in the rise of native actors like Graham Greene, who was nominated for an Academy Award for his role in Dances with Wolves. You could see Jay's influence in films like Smoke Signals in 1998, which was the first feature film written, directed, and produced by Native Americans. Jay's name is literally carved in the concrete of Hollywood in the form of his Walk of Fame star. His legacy lives on in Native cinema and representation. He was posthumously inducted into the Western Performers Hall of Fame in 1993 and the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame in 1997 under the name Harry Tonto Smith. His portrait still hangs in Buffalo's Shays Performing Arts Center today. His influence shows up in every Indigenous storyteller who demands more than stereotypes and chooses to speak, act, and write on their own terms. And even though Jay once said he cringed inside every single time he had to deliver Tonto's broken English lines, he never let that bitterness stop him from moving forward. On The Tonight Show in 1969, he came out dressed as Tonto, looked straight at the camera, and said with a smile, "My name is Tonto, I hail from Toronto, and I speak Esperanto." It was his way of taking control of the narrative and making fun of the whole ridiculous situation. Even when the lines weren't his own, even when he was forced to play stereotypes, Jay Silverhills always knew how to reclaim the stage and make it his own. So what's the truth about Jay Silverhills that's finally coming to light? The truth is that he was a pioneer who paid an enormous price for being first. He was the first Native American to play a Native American character on television, and that achievement opened doors that had been locked shut for generations. But he also had to smile while playing a character whose meme meant stupid. He had to accept being paid half of what his white co-star made. He had to deal with racist directors who literally tried to attack him physically. He had to speak in broken English even though he was perfectly articulate. He had to watch white actors in dark makeup steal roles that should have gone to real Native actors. And through it all, he never stopped fighting. He never stopped trying to make things better for the next generation. He created a workshop that trained Native actors. He wrote letters to presidents and executives. He used his fame to shine a light on issues that Hollywood wanted to ignore. Jay Silverhills wasn't just an actor playing a sidekick. He was a warrior fighting a battle that most people couldn't even see. He was a bridge between two worlds, trying to honor his heritage while navigating an industry that didn't respect it. He was a father, a husband, an athlete, an activist, and a man who refused to be defined by the limitations other people tried to place on him. Today, when you watch old episodes of The Lone Ranger, try to see past the costume and the broken English. Try to see the real man underneath. Try to imagine what it must have been like to smile for the camera while carrying all that pain, frustration, and knowledge. Jay Silverhills made history, but history wasn't kind to him while he was making it. He deserved better pay, better roles, better treatment, and better recognition. But he fought anyway. He pushed forward anyway. He opened doors anyway. And because of his sacrifice, Native actors today have opportunities that didn't exist before. His story isn't just about one man playing Tonto on a TV show. It's about dignity in the face of humiliation. It's about perseverance in the face of systemic racism. It's about using whatever platform you have, no matter how limited, to make things better for those who come after you. That's the truth about Jay Silverhills that's finally coming to light. And that truth is more powerful and more important than any character he ever played on screen. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about what you see on TV, if it made you realize,